I think what got a lot of people angry with my tweet was that I said Vader wouldn't stand for this, and these fucking idiots are like, "Well, Vader kills kids. He would totally." It's like there's levels to evil. Like just because he kills people and kids doesn't mean that he's going to full on assault a woman in a sexual way. It's just very strange.
I mean, he did choke Padme while she was pregnant with his children.
He did, but he didn't force himself on her.
Oh, well, that's all right then.
Hello there. Now, I know I said my next video was going to be an actual proper review of Andor Season 2, but when I sat down to write up the script for that, something about it just didn't feel right to me. It's not that there's not enough to say about it, the problem is that there's too much, and like I said in my Season 1 video a couple years back, one of these days I want to do a proper deep dive into both seasons of this show and thoroughly break down why it works so well as a piece of art, and why I consider it to be the best thing to ever come out of Star Wars. While I consider Season 1 the overall better season, Season 2 is what firmly solidified this show for me as an essential piece of the Star Wars universe. It's to a point now where I don't think you can properly watch these movies without Andor and Rogue One, and it kind of feels like the overarching narrative of this saga just never was complete before now. The show is a masterpiece, and I hope to one day do it justice. So instead of doing a short, broad strokes review like I did for Season 1 with the promise of a much larger breakdown in the future, I decided I wanted to make a video on a topic that's far more interesting to me. Because, you see, Andor is a show that's received a fair amount of backlash. It is a Star Wars show after all, and the conversation surrounding this series fascinates me on both sides. You have fans who are typically fond of the Disney era shows calling Andor fans pretentious elitists for daring to consider it better than the other stuff coming out right now, and there's been this growing sentiment that the only reason creatives like Dave Filoni are receiving so much hate nowadays is because us Andor fanatics have found a new sacred cow to worship. New creative good, which means we can start hating on the old one we used to like, just like we did to poor old George when the prequels came out. That's the basic idea. Obviously, anyone who's been following my channel for any period of time will know that I and a lot of other people in my circle have been critical of Filoni for a long time now, longer than Andor's even existed, and it's for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with this show. I've made several videos about the abysmal state of his and others' writing, how it fumbles at tying into the larger themes of this series, and how it drastically fails to maintain continuity with the larger world, making for an incoherent mess riddled with confused, contradictory ideas. I'll spare you all the sermon because I've gone over all of that at length already, but it goes without saying the Filoni shows and others like it are bad for reasons that aren't even remotely related to Andor, and we've been criticizing them for much longer than this show's been around. It really is telling, though, that fans of Dave seem to only be able to conceptualize this as though we're just mindlessly beheading any old creator and moving on to the next one like a pack of religious zealots looking for the next golden calf to pray to, because that's basically just what a lot of Filoni fans are, and it's been that way for some time. I mean, this image literally exists and has done the rounds for years as an expression of just how great his work is. I know it's a meme, so maybe you can say it's not meant to be taken seriously, but it feels pretty representative of the way a lot of Filoni fans have been acting these last several years anytime I've criticized any of his shitty TV shows. There's a cult-like energy to it, and it smells like shit, if you ask me. And I can't speak for every Andor fan out there, but most of us aren't slavishly devoted to Tony Gilroy like he's some infallible god. He's just a man who made an incredible show. And until he puts something out there deserving of the same scorn as, like, Ahsoka or The Acolyte or Kenobi, we're just not gonna treat him the same way a lot of us have treated these other creators. Why would we, you know? Now, it is also worth saying that anytime shows like Andor and Ahsoka get compared to each other, Ahsoka fans come out of the woodwork to say, there's nothing wrong with both these shows existing, Star Wars has room for both. It's this mentality that the only reason people are saying one is better than the other is that Andor is serious and mature, while Ahsoka is silly and goofy. They think we just want every show to be some gritty spy thriller drama with mature themes and darker tones, but that's not what we're saying at all. We're just asking for the more pulpy action-adventure type shows to be well written. Literally, all we want is for the plot to make sense and for there to be even a basic attempt at writing character and theme. When we say we want more shows to be like Andor, we just mean we want them to be good. But that's just one side of the discourse, and this video isn't really about them. That was all just something I've been wanting to get off my chest for a while now because I'm sick of hearing it. No, the actual reason I've called you all here is to talk about the other, much more annoying side of all this. And I'm gonna use a word that'll make a lot of you mad at me, but it's the most fitting descriptor of what these these people are. Today, I want to talk about the grifters. Some of you guys don't like that word because I recognize there's something of an overlap between myself and some of these creators in terms of our audience. Naturally, making a career out of criticizing Disney Star Wars is gonna draw in a lot of the same crowds that also flock to channels like The Critical Drinker, Nerdrotic, Geeks and Gamers, all the greats. There's too many to list, and I'm frankly not interested in taking shots at all of them in this video. But the essential through line here is that these are channels I'm very critical of because they take pains to pander to an audience of right-wingers who decry when popular new media is woke. And by woke, I basically just mean like it had a woman in it. Or, perish the thought, a black guy? Fucking crazy, right? What do they think of next? A black woman? Oh my god! A lot of you guys just heard that and assumed I'm presenting a straw man, the same straw man Disney Star Wars fans lay out to dispel any valid criticisms of things like The Last Jedi. But I promise you, I know more about the way these channels operate than you guys seem to think. Many of you seem to believe I'm not largely familiar with a lot of these creators and am only regurgitating the same leftist points I've heard from others without actually giving them a fair shake, not realizing that I actually used to follow a lot of them and considered myself a fan, because there are a lot of people in their audience who, like me, followed these guys because they were looking for like-minded creators who wanted storytelling to be good and weren't happy with the direction of a lot of modern media, namely Star Wars and Marvel shows. Anytime I make passing remarks about these people, I get flooded with comments saying, no, all they want is good writing, and to act like they're only mad at these new shows because women and minorities exist is just approaching them in bad faith. Meanwhile, Critical Drinker will do an entire video dissecting the Acolyte trailer and take actual time out of his day to count how many black and brown kids can be seen in one single shot. Yes, he really did that.
I mean, I definitely had fun playing a particularly challenging game of Spot the White Guy with this trailer, because damn man, this one shows enough to fulfill Disney's entire DEI quota for the next 2 fiscal years. For example, check out this collection of Jedi Padawans and see if you can identify the one demographic that's mysteriously left out.
It's not a straw man to say these people hate modern media for incorporating left-wing politics, because that's literally just something they all do, and they're not even trying to deny it. It's literally a staple of their channels. Drinker is famous for calling out what he likes to call the message.
The message.
And he's been doing it for years. I am not saying that any YouTube channel who's critical of Disney Star Wars is some kind of right-wing nut job only trying to pander to an audience of sycophants. Obviously, that'd be pretty hypocritical of me considering the type of content I regularly put out. The only people I call out for having right-wing motivations backing the type of content they make are the people who literally do that shit openly. They are not trying to hide it.
A couple other complaints that I have, and they have to do a little bit with identity politics. There were only a couple good people in this movie. You had Bruce Wayne, Batman, and you had Alfred. Those are the only 2 good white people. The rest of the 3 other major players that I would consider like overall like moral good people were, you had Jim Gordon, who's black in this. You had Catwoman, who's not white in this. And then you had the mayor, who's a black woman. Again, very much on the nose for current day Hollywood. Did not like that. Took a little bit off the score for me, to be honest.
And to the other point about how they just want good storytelling and won't cry about wokeness if they get it, all I can really say is, Andor's really good, and that didn't seem to be enough for a lot of these guys. Critical Drinker specifically is actually much softer on Andor than other people I've seen in his circles, although even then he took time out of his Andor Season 1 review to randomly go on a tangent about the strong, capable female characters being just a bit too much at times.
Also, while Andor is nowhere near as obnoxious as other Star Wars shows when it comes to identity politics, you can definitely feel the Kathleen Kennedy influence at times. The tired, predictable trope of the strong, capable female character quietly directing and fixing things behind the scenes crops up a little too often, and if I'm honest, you could probably have cut 1 or 2 of them out of the story without losing too much.
It's so strange, because in this little rant he talks about how there's a nice balancing act between the strong women and the strong men on the show, as compared to some contemporary Star Wars shows, yet also advocates for some of the female characters to be cut out. If it's pretty well balanced as is, wouldn't removing some of the capable women imbalance it in favor of the capable men on the show? show. Is that okay suddenly just because it gives the men the advantage? I don't know, whatever. It's a really strange point in an otherwise middling video. It's largely positive towards Andor, but even then, I'm not impressed with a lot of the points he makes, and that's to do with a larger discussion we'll get into later about how exactly these types of people think and how they discuss media. I'm not here to talk too much about Critical Drinker specifically, though, because like I said, he's a lot nicer to the show than a lot of the other grifters, but in order to give this video some kind of structure, I decided it'd be best to shine a light on a few different people, but have the main focus be on one specific guy. Because what we can glean by watching videos from this creator will, I hope, really help illustrate the main thesis of this video. Plus, it gives me a chance to finally talk about one video in particular that's been living in my head rent-free for almost 3 fucking years. I'm talking about Robot Head. For those of you with lives, Robot Head is just one of the many in the pantheon of anti-Disney, anti-modern media critics, whose main appeal to the people that watch him is that he's edgy and tells it how it is, and isn't all that concerned with pandering to the left-wing soy boys who care about gay beta shit like human rights. I confess he's one of the Grifter Sphere YouTubers I did watch for a short time back when I still gravitated toward this type of content, although I pretty quickly gave up on his channel after it became clear that even when he was right that the show he was talking about was bad, he often wasn't right for the right reasons, and I'm gonna explain what I mean by that. While doing research for this video, I decided to check out a few of his more recent works criticizing some of the non-Andor Disney Star Wars stuff, and the contents of these videos aren't particularly thrilling. Aside from the obvious shit like him feeling the need to bring up woke bad every 5 minutes to satiate his audience.
A Jedi doesn't pull her weapon unless prepared to kill.
Her weapon? I like how we are all pronoun sensitive, unless using certain pronouns helps our agenda, even when the all-powerful, non-gender specific pronoun is the one that should be used. A Jedi shouldn't pull their weapon, not her weapon. But Star Wars is now a girl brand, written by lesbian feminist activists, so of course it's her weapon. Like we hear later how her parents are her mums.
You lost your entire family. Your mother's.
No agenda here.
The videos are also just rife with terrible points. Take this one, for example, from his Acolyte Episode 1 video.
We start with the antagonist of this god-awful show turning up to a space village to murder the local Jedi Master. To achieve this, she isn't going to do anything smart like maybe using a child for bait and setting up a trap to get this Jedi, nor is she going to try and kill the Jedi from a distance, which you think would be the smart move. No, this very overconfident, well, she is a she, so why wouldn't she be overly confident? This very confident assassin just walks up to the Jedi Master in broad daylight in a busy bar and says,
Attack me with all your strength.
There's the workings of a semi-decent point in there, in that maybe May could have waited until Andara was alone to initiate this fight, but I take specific issue with this criticism because her fighting Andara head-on was, like, the point of why she's even doing this. May is currently training to be a Sith acolyte for this edgelord in a knockoff Kylo Ren mask, and part of that training, as is specifically pointed out at several points in this show, is that she needs to fight a Jedi Master in a 1v1 and win without resorting to a weapon of any kind. Cheap-shotting Andara with a sniper rifle or otherwise attacking her in a way that gives her a more strategic advantage would completely undermine the point of this fight. And like I said, this is only a review for episode 1, which he presumably started working on right after the episode came out, and maybe he didn't have the full context from the show to go off of yet. But episodes 1 and 2 premiered on the same night, and there are multiple scenes in these opening episodes that more than sufficiently supply this context.
An acolyte kills without a weapon. An acolyte kills the dream.
I have 2 Jedi to kill after Torben, and I will kill one of them without a weapon and please the Master.
There's also just a lot of random jabs at The Last Jedi in, like, all of his videos.
And I find it hard to believe they had any type of fight choreographer on the set, which wouldn't be a surprise. We saw Rian Johnson choreographing some of the Last Jedi interactions, and look how that went.
And that's nothing new or anything, all the grifters do it. It just never comes about naturally, and is rarely even relevant to the topic he's discussing when it happens, and that's kind of telling in its own way. We all know how channels like this one got so popular, and Robot Head knows it too. TLJ was the one that really started this era of what people are calling the culture war, which I find really cringe, but it is what it is. And if you don't remind your audience that you hate The Last Jedi in every single one of your videos, they might forget and unsubscribe from your channel. This again speaks to that larger thesis I was talking about a second ago, but just put a pin in that for now. I'm not saying there aren't good points made in any of the videos I've watched of his about Ahsoka or the Acolyte, but when I have to sift through multiple bad arguments, random tangents about girl bosses and woke messaging, and random references to 80s movies that have little to nothing to do with the actual contents of the show he's talking about, just to get to those points, they kind of get lost in the sauce. I'm not really sure what value I'm meant to find in a 15-minute video when like 12 of those minutes are just shit. So yeah, like I said, I watched Robot Head for a little while, but it quickly became clear to me that he wasn't very good at his job, and on top of that, he was an obnoxious bigot. And then along came his Andor Season 1 video. And by this point, I no longer had any interest in his content, but for whatever reason, I decided to check it out anyway, and when I tell you...
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
I won't even lie to you guys. Part of the reason I even decided to make this video at all was because for years now, I've wanted to talk about what an unmitigated disaster this video is, and now I finally have an excuse. For the sake of time, unfortunately, I can't go over every point he makes in this, but I want to focus on the main crux of the video, which is that Andor, while being solid and competent in a lot of places, is not Star Wars.
It all feels a bit wrong, and the feeling of it being a bit wrong has nothing to do with it being surprisingly well executed. It all feels a bit wrong because it doesn't feel anything like Star Wars, which is a bit of a problem when you're supposedly making Star Wars content.
Now, this is certainly not a new argument against Andor. It's one we've been hearing ever since the show came out, and mainly became popular as a meme criticism thanks to the infamous bricks and screws argument from Star Wars Theory.
There's so many important things just with visuals alone, like to make it feel like it's Star Wars. Things that you wouldn't even notice. You're not supposed to have screws in Star Wars. You're not supposed to have like brick walls that we would see in everyday life. Those things don't exist. You're supposed to have guns with clips that look like actual AKs. Those aren't really, like, these are all little things that just George never did.
Star Wars has always had bricks and screws, obviously, and this was a very silly thing to say, but the underlying sentiment behind it is one that I actually understand and can sympathize with, even if I don't really agree with it entirely. There are some elements in Andor that are noticeably earthy compared to most other things in Star Wars, and that's usually pretty surface level stuff, like the rebels using what look to be regular Earth guns during the Aldhani heist, or the fact that some of the attire on Gorman is essentially just what you might expect to see in 1940s France. For me personally, my one minor gripe with the aesthetics of Andor would be all the screens. Star Wars has always had screens used for characters to communicate with one another on, and I'm not necessarily saying they're out of place, but I don't know, man. I just like seeing holograms and wanted more of those in the show. To be fair, they did actually include some in the final arc, which I guess means Tony Gilroy got my kissograms, but they're largely absent from a lot of this season, and it's especially noticeable when I'm watching Bix in her relatively normal, earthy apartment, laying down on a mattress and watching shows on a 1980s television. It just kind of takes me out of it a little. This, along with some of the other aesthetic choices I just went over, are all things that I consider pretty surface level as criticism goes. It hardly makes the show itself bad, but I can understand if it takes you out of the experience a little bit, just like with that American suburbia planet we got in Skeleton Crew. That all being said, I'm of the opinion that overall, this show not only does feel like Star Wars and belong in this world, but also that Andor is more thematically in line with the original trilogy than anything we've gotten since the 80s. In every meaningful way, this show is the most Star Wars thing we've gotten since Return of the Jedi, arguably since The Empire Strikes Back, and any minor aesthetic nitpicks you or I might have shouldn't take away from that. From the character work, to the themes, to the general style and presentation, I honestly believe no other piece of on-screen Star Wars media has come close to matching what the original Star Wars movie set out to be when compared to Andor, and that counts for a lot more if you ask me. But interestingly, none of what we just went over actually seems to be why Robot Head believes this show isn't Star Wars, so let's hear what he has to say.
So why doesn't it feel like Star Wars? Star Wars was a classic tale of good and evil, wrapped in a fantasy sci-fi adventure. And fantasy being the important bit, Star Wars is closer in tone to a wizard and dragon adventure than it is to wormholes and scientific problems. Now, I hate to break this to a lot of people, but another thing about the Star Wars universe is that it isn't real. The locations aren't real. The events aren't real. I have to explain this because a lot of people like to say things like, I want to know more about the side characters in Star Wars, or I want more Star Wars without the annoying Jedi and Sith, As if Star Wars is a real place and these other amazing stories are sitting there waiting to be discovered. It's such a bizarre way to look at art and creativity and how fiction works. The Star Wars side stories these people think would be fascinating just don't exist.
Okay, this is such a strange argument for a number of reasons. All I can really say is, what the fuck are you talking about? Pretty much anyone you talk to about these movies will tell you that when they watched A New Hope and got to the cantina scene, their imaginations instantly went wild with all sorts of crazy ideas about what this world is and who all these people were, all these interesting aliens and what their stories might be. The great thing about world building is that it's a world that you're building. It's meant to continue existing even if your characters aren't around to see it. All the background characters we meet, all the places we visit, all these things have a history and a culture that are just waiting to be explored, and that's what makes scenes like the cantina so wonderful and exciting. To be fair to the guy, I don't think Robot Head simply believes these characters vanish out of existence in universe the second they're not on screen. I think he recognizes that obviously they're meant to have stories of their own, but he believes telling those stories is unnecessary.
I'm always perplexed when people say they want Star Wars to move away from the Jedi and the Force, as if Star Wars has more to offer.
He thinks that because the main storyline of the original films is centered around the Jedi-Sith conflict, that's apparently all Star Wars has to offer, and that to want stories to exist beyond the Jedi or the Force is, what did he say? A bizarre way to look at art and creativity and how fiction works? Why? He compares it to other popular IPs like Indiana Jones or Back to the Future, and how silly it would be to ask for stories about side characters that have nothing to do with the premise of those respective properties.
I really hope the new Indiana Jones has more school politics and more talking and less adventure. And please, can we move on from all that archaeological crap? Because I'd like to know more about the side characters, like Mutt. Please, Disney, an adult show where Mutt visits every brothel in Tijuana. Why not Back to the Future, but with less time travel? Maybe we could see how Marty's uncle ended up in jail. Maybe it could be brothel related.
But I think there's a pretty obvious difference between Indiana Jones and Back to the Future compared to something like Star Wars. Back to the Future is a time travel story, and telling a story about random side characters that has nothing to do with time travel would be weird. The same with trying to tell a story set in the world of Indiana Jones that has nothing to do with ancient artifacts or mythology, because that's what those stories are about. But it's also very interesting the way he's chosen to present these arguments, because I don't necessarily see why there'd be anything wrong with setting a story in the worlds of these films, following a different set of characters that also dealt with the same subject matter. So a story about a different archaeologist in a different time period from Indy, uncovering different hidden treasures that tie into the deeper mythology. I don't see anything wrong with that. I mean, I wouldn't call it Indiana Jones if Indy isn't gonna be in it, but setting it in the same world? Don't see why not. Same with Back to the Future. As long as it's about time travel, I don't see any reason why you couldn't tell a story about someone other than Doc and Marty going to different points in history. But either way, those things are completely different from Star Wars, because Star Wars isn't just one thing, and it never was. The film is called Star Wars, which is a pretty broad title that can encapsulate a lot of things, and I think if you have stars in it and war in it, then you're probably gonna be fine. You can argue all you want that for it to be a Star Wars show, it needs to also tie into the themes of the original films and build on them in some way, but A, Andor does that, and it does it very well, and B, does it need to do that? I mean, I guess ideally I'd like for it to, but that seems like a somewhat arbitrary requirement that you've randomly tacked onto this argument just to try and take what I consider to be a frankly bizarre position. Because this treads dangerously close to the "we didn't need this" argument, which you really want to try and steer clear from. He makes a point about how apparently, unlike Andor, there are countless EU stories out there which understand the world of Star Wars and, quote, aren't trying to fight against it.
What does exist are many loved books that would make for great content. Writers that understood the world of Star Wars and weren't trying to fight against it.
And now I'm just confused, because do you want stories about side characters or don't you? It's not clear if when he brings up the old expanded universe, he's talking about all the countless books, comics, video games, and other forms of media that fall under that umbrella, or if he's specifically referring to the original Thrawn trilogy when he says this, since that's the only example he chooses to actually show. This is mainly because it's hard to tell what he's trying to say here at all, as with so many other points in his videos. They're kind of just things he says without any rhyme or reason to pad the runtime, kind of like what he says right after this.
Writers that understood the world of Star Wars and weren't trying to fight against it, which is very different to what we're getting today. But what am I thinking? Of course Andor is the story everyone wants.
When we get to camp, we're going to tell them this was my idea and we've been planning it all the while. If you change that in any way, you and I are going to have a big problem.
Was the point here just that a woman told a man what to do? Like, I genuinely can't tell you why else he might have played that clip. If he is talking about the entire expanded universe, then, well, obviously there are a lot of stories centered around side characters that have little to nothing to do with the Jedi or the Sith or the Force. There's lots of stories about Boba Fett, which is the example he keeps going back to in this video for a random side character who doesn't need his own show, so I wonder what he makes of those. But if he just means the Thrawn books specifically, then I guess there's something to this, because at least those books continue the stories of our OT characters, as well as the larger Empire versus Rebellion conflict. But like I said a minute ago, we're treading dangerously close to we didn't need this territory, because you can say, well, the Thrawn trilogy is really good, they should have just adapted that, and I would respond with, why? The story ended perfectly fine in Return of the Jedi. We know the Empire wasn't toppled overnight just because the Emperor died, but that doesn't mean we need to see how the New Republic established itself and beat back the Imperial remnants. Matter of fact, why'd they even bother making the sequels at all? We didn't need Empire or Jedi to know that the Rebellion destroyed the Death Star and dealt a major blow to the Empire, so anything after this is superfluous. And honestly, now I'm starting to question why we even got A New Hope. We didn't need that, did we? You guys see where I'm going with this? It's a self-defeating argument, and it doesn't really get us anywhere.
The Jedi and the Force are the main thing that separates Star Wars from a lot of other mundane sci-fi. And look what you get when they do remove it completely. And look what you get when you see just a hint of it. Plus, Disney has already spent their whole time racing away from the Jedi and the Sith.
It's time for the Jedi to end.
I always hate when people cite things the characters say at the beginning of their arcs before they've learned whatever lesson they'll go on to learn throughout the movie as the apparent thesis of the film or the agenda of the writers behind it. I am by no means a fan of The Last Jedi, but it really seems like a lot of the people who hate this movie don't actually know that when, for example, Kylo says, "Let the past die, kill it if you have to," that's not actually the movie saying that that's a good mindset, nor is it some kind of meta commentary from Rian Johnson about how he's trying to systematically destroy everything you grew up loving about this franchise. And similarly, Luke saying it's time for the Jedi to end is not the film advocating for his position. His arc literally ends with him realizing he was wrong about that very thing.
The rebellion is reborn today. The war is just beginning, and I will not be the last Jedi.
I find it an absolutely ridiculous position Robot Head is taking here, that Disney apparently wants to move away from the Jedi, when all they've been doing for the past 10 years is trying desperately to remind you that they exist. He cites a bunch of examples of different Star Wars projects that are either devoid of Jedi and Sith entirely, or include them very minimally. So, let's go down the list, shall we?
Rogue One, no Jedi.
The movie literally ends with a Sith Lord sparking up his lightsaber and bodying an entire group of rebels, which is often cited as people's favorite part of the film. Rogue One is actually criticized pretty often for trying too hard to bank on OT nostalgia, and in most cases, I'd say that's for good reason. Aside from Vader, there are several other moments that make sure to remind you that the Jedi exist, including literally having the Force theme play when Bail Organa first shows up.
Your friend, the Jedi.
He served me well during the Clone Wars, and has lived in hiding since the Emperor's purge. Yes, I will send for him.
I know what that is!
Solo a Star Wars story, no Jedi.
No Jedi, but they do make sure to throw a pointless Darth Maul cameo in at the end, and just in case he didn't pick up on it, he even turns on his lightsaber for no reason just to make everyone go,
The sequels, fake Jedi. Mandalorian, minimal Jedi.
Yeah, Luke only shows up at the end of season 2, so I guess you've got to Hey, wait a minute! Isn't the entire plot of the first 2 seasons about Mando trying to get a Force-sensitive child to the Jedi so they can raise him as one of their own? Along the way, he meets other Jedi or Jedi-adjacent characters and even visits Tython, which in the EU is where the first Jedi temple was built. Pretty sure it's Octo-in canon, but what are you gonna do? It's still a site of great significance to the Jedi, which is the entire reason our characters are even here.
Boba Fett, no Jedi.
So, like, did you just miss the entire episode that was devoted to Luke training Grogu at his up-and-coming Jedi Academy, or...
Obi-Wan, Dollar Store Sith.
Well, the Inquisitors are literally all former Jedi, so jot that down first and foremost. But also, the main character of the show is a Jedi Master and former council member, and he fights Darth Vader twice. Each and every one of these examples not only completely dismantles Robot Head's point, but it actually proves mine really well. Andor was never trying to deviate from the Jedi or the Force, and that's a lot lot more apparent after you watch season 2, but to throw him a bone here, this video came out before that. It was simply trying to focus on characters who don't have special powers to help them get out of a scrape. It's about the regular people who have to rely on themselves and band together to fight against tyranny, which isn't a deviation from the mythological side of this story, it's complementary to it. The rebellion in the OT was entirely composed of normal people trying their best against impossible odds, and what made Luke so special is that he was capable of certain things the others just weren't. It's what ultimately won the day in the battle to destroy the first Death Star. But just like how the rebels never would have won the war without the Jedi, Luke never would have been in the position he was to deal such a blow against the Empire had it not been for the average Joe paving the path for him. And that's something Andor thematically represents in spades. The struggle against the Empire was a collaborative effort. Everyone had their part to play, and regardless of the outcome of the throne room fight and the struggle between Luke, Vader, and the Emperor, it was up to everyone out there actually fighting the battle to ensure that the galaxy was freed. Now again, I can't speak for every Andor fan, but I can say for myself and a lot of others I know that the reason it was so refreshing that there weren't any Jedi or Sith or lightsabers in the show wasn't because we hate those elements of the mythos. It was actually the exact opposite. From a meta standpoint, it was really novel to see after every single other Disney Star Wars thing insisted on including them, even when it didn't make sense to. But also, it helps maintain the idea that the Jedi are special and rare, and that by the time Luke came along, it had been so long since most people had seen one that it was like King Arthur himself had leapt out of a storybook and come to save the day. He goes into another point later in the video about how Andor and all the other Disney Star Wars shows are derivative and lacking in uniqueness, and it's kind of just a nothing burger argument just to give him an excuse to jerk off all the cool, badass sci-fi shows he watched growing up, which, like I said earlier, is an obligatory part of every single one of his fucking videos. It's also apparently derivative of WALL-E because look, guys, there's a scene where a robot wheels itself through a dump. It's just like in that other movie with similar visuals. I'd make a joke about how he's acting like one of those annoying Snyder was the blueprint people you see on Twitter, but that's a thing he unironically does in one of his season 2 videos.
I would give anything to have seen Zack Snyder's face when he saw this Disney Star Wars farm idea that had absolutely no connection to his Rebel Moon script. His head must have exploded.
This guy's like if I asked ChatGPT to write a Star Wars review based on a bunch of half-assed grifter talking points, I swear to God. But the real reason I brought up this point was because of this little moment here.
The language was different, the stories were different, the fucking villains were different. It wasn't always the bloody Empire.
Honestly, man, what the fuck do you want anymore? Like, you just bitched about how Star Wars isn't allowed to deviate from the central conflict of the mainline films, and now you're mad that the villain in this show is the fucking Empire? Make up your mind, dude. I understand and actually agree with the general complaint that modern Star Wars has a bad habit of refusing to deal with anything outside of the same very narrow window of the timeline with the same types of heroes and villains. If it's not a show about the rebellion versus the Empire or something adjacent to that, then it's a Mandoverse show where the main characters have to fight someone in the Imperial Remnant, and don't even get me started on the sequel trilogy literally just revamping the Empire and Rebellion with a fresh new coat of paint. But if that's the position Robot Head wants to take and is insistent on lumping Andor into that mix, then he can't also complain that Disney is apparently trying to move away from the Jedi and all the other things we loved about the original trilogy.
Man, I think Ahsoka and The Mandalorian is the only time they have come close to recapturing the true fantasy feel of Star Wars. But for some reason, modern Lucasfilm are too arrogant or too stupid to understand this. So they keep trying to move away from the things that people love about Star Wars.
There's a really long tangent he goes on that takes up like a quarter of this fucking video about how the first scene is set in a brothel and how adult stuff doesn't belong in Star Wars, but I'm mostly going to save that whole discussion for the season 2 stuff and that scene, if you know, you know. What I will say for now is he says the brothel scene didn't add anything.
And the brothel scene added absolutely nothing to the story.
Which... like, no. It literally kicked off the inciting incident of the story. It established Cassian's motivations as they currently are at the beginning of the show. And funny enough, it actually accomplished something on a meta level, which was that it's telegraphing to the audience that this wasn't a fucking kids show and you shouldn't be letting your kids watch it. But like I said, we'll circle back to that point. For now, there's one last thing he says in the season 1 video that I want to talk about. It's something that I've actually been looking for an excuse to talk about ever since this episode first came out, so I'm really glad Robot Head chose this specific comparison to make in the video.
That's why they only keep a 40-man regiment in the garrison.
Because they know no one's stupid enough to try it.
I don't see any shields.
That's because no one would be stupid enough to attack them.
I'm telling you guys, this video was custom made for me specifically. So, you guys know I don't like the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, right? I think I've made that clear in the past. And this line of dialogue is one that I specifically criticized in the second part of my critique. So, when a very similar exchange happened in Andor, I was just waiting for some dumbass to act like the two are even remotely the same. And here we are. For those who need a refresher, the scene in Kenobi entails Obi-Wan and the proto-rebel people discussing breaking into Fortress Inquisitorius to rescue Leia, who was kidnapped by Reva. This is the same place you might have recognized from Jedi Fallen Order if you played that game, which is canon and takes place 5 years earlier in the timeline, and that makes all of what I'm about to mention even funnier. Yes, guys, I knew about that. Thank you for your endless barrage of comments. I would have brought it up myself if I didn't have a rule about discarding extended material in my analyses. Anyway, regardless of whether or not you take that extra piece of information into account, this is still the home base of the Inquisitors, who are Vader's own personal entourage of Jedi hunters. It's located on Nur, which is in the Mustafar system.
Nur. It's a water moon. It's in the Mustafar system.
Meaning it's also in very close proximity to the castle of Darth Vader himself. The idea that a place like this, with this many valuable Imperial players, including Darth fucking Vader, wouldn't have defensive shields in the event of an attack just because they don't think anyone would be stupid enough to try it, is fucking insane. Like, I get that the Empire is arrogant, and that's actually a point that I've had to argue excessively when defending Andor from bad faith arguments, but Vader was most certainly always the exception to that rule. In A New Hope, he's one of the only Imperials who took seriously the fact that the rebels got away with the Death Star plans, even when basically everyone else was treating it like they were untouchable. He's not gonna allow the base of his own squad of Jedi killers to be undefended just because they're arrogant enough to think nobody will attack them. They literally get attacked by 2 airspeeders at the end of the episode, and that's enough of a force to seriously damage a lot of equipment in the main hangar. Imagine what an actual fighting force could accomplish here. The only reason Fortress Inquisitorius doesn't have any shields is just to facilitate that moment, and to allow Obi-Wan to sneak his way onto the base through some kind of garbage disposal chute, because the writers couldn't be bothered to think of a more clever way to get him inside. It's lazy and it's contrived. Andor, on the other hand, is a completely different context. In this arc, Cassian and the other rebels are trying to rob an Imperial garrison positioned on a backwater planet in what's essentially the middle of nowhere. Aldhani has no political relevance, and the only reason it even has an Imperial presence is because it's just close enough to conveniently transfer resources between the inner and outer rims.
Aldhani has the unfortunate quality of being close to nothing and not very far away from everything. It's the perfect hub for distribution, if one were trying to take over the galaxy.
Yes, it's only a 40-man garrison, but that's more than sufficient when they have an airbase located 52 clicks away that can be on any intruders within 10 minutes, so the rebels have had to plan for that accordingly with the Eye, a beautiful occurrence that happens only once every 3 years, which would allow them the cover they need to evade whatever TIE fighters are sent after them, and that's only after they've made off with the money, which, if all goes according to plan, will entail them sneaking in undercover and not being discovered until after they've gotten away. Not only will the Eye shield them from the TIEs and make it harder for their pursuers to catch them effectively if it comes to a chase, but it being a beautiful and rare thing also helps them because whatever meager defensive presence this garrison had before is going to be significantly diminished, as most of the troops stationed there are going to be out enjoying the festivities. This is a planet where nothing ever happens and they're bored out of their minds. They don't expect to be attacked because nothing exciting like that ever happens here. So when the event is taking place, all that'll be left to man their post is what's absolutely essential. A skeleton crew.
The thing you hear when posted to Aldhani is that perhaps you'll be lucky enough to be there for the Eye. The idea of being this close and not seeing it. And I know we can't all be up there, but I fear morale might be crushed by having anything more than an essential roster down here tomorrow night.
The man they're talking to, by the way, is Lieutenant Gorn, who's been helping the rebels along the way and actively wants this plan to succeed. So of course he's going to give his men what they're asking for if it means it'll be easier to get in and out of the base. The show takes the time to painstakingly establish all the moving parts that have gone into this plan having even a chance of working. And unlike in Kenobi, where Obi-Wan just kind of goes in half-cocked like it's nothing, this is a plan that takes several months for the team to prepare for, with an an inside man helping them throughout all of that. And even then, things go wrong and they take several casualties. They succeed in stealing most of the payroll, but it's a narrow escape, and it comes at a heavy cost. These two situations couldn't be more different if they tried to be, and I'm so thankful to you, my Australian friend, for giving me the chance to demonstrate why after all these years. Thank you for being fucking shit at your job. So that was Robot Head's Season 1 video, and if you hadn't already picked up on this by now, it's not very good. So I can't say I was especially looking forward to hearing what he had to say about Season 2, and honestly, his videos kinda disappointed me. As of my recording this, he's only made 2 videos, one for the first arc and one for the third, and something you'll notice instantly here is he kinda doesn't say anything about them. Let me explain what I mean by this. A thing that I noticed when watching his Andor videos when compared to his coverage of other Disney Star Wars shows is that with his videos on the Acolyte or Ahsoka, he actually talks about the plot. He breaks down a lot of things about them that don't make sense, and to his credit, when he's not randomly ranting about the existence of women and is actually focused on the contents of the story, he actually makes some decent points. His video on the Ahsoka finale managed to go 5 whole minutes without there being anything egregiously wrong with it, because he mostly just went over details about how Thrawn was acting really stupid to give the heroes a chance to stop him, how our heroes were moving at a snail's pace toward Thrawn's holdout despite the fact that time was of the essence. These are all things that I talked about in my Ahsoka coverage, and I think they're totally valid points that are worth bringing up. Then he randomly starts whining about girl power again because, you know, this is still a Robot Head video we're talking about, but the point remains the same. These so-called critics are actually capable of picking apart the plots when the plots are bad, which is all fine and good if you have a mission to shit on anything Disney makes for Star Wars no matter what, but you run into a bit of a hiccup when it comes to talking about Andor because the show is really good. Go figure. And as a result, you'll notice that in the Season 1 video, he mostly didn't talk about the actual contents of the show beyond very surface level things like the fact that a brothel was in it. Or later on in the video, there was a point about how they're gearing up for another heist adventure, which he then used to complain about how all these shows just recycle the same ideas because other Star Wars shows had heists in them. That video is so devoid of any actual discussion about what actually happens in the show, and that's especially noticeable when you know that Robot Head is all about breaking down terrible plots. If the show is so bad, where's the plot analysis, my man? And I don't know, this makes it seem pretty obvious what's actually happening here, doesn't it? It seems like Robot Head couldn't find ways to articulate what was actually wrong with the show, but he didn't want to say it was good. He's got a reputation to uphold. So what's a grifter to do other than make up a random ass-backwards and arbitrary standard about how Star Wars apparently isn't allowed to deviate from the Jedi-Sith conflict and focus on side characters, except it's completely fine when other writers do it as long as it's not Disney. And also, Andor is derivative for reusing the Empire as their central villain. Makes perfect sense. The reason I was disappointed in his Season 2 coverage is that I was hoping he was going to force himself to come up with some other ridiculous hill to die on. But this time around, he actually does kind of try to tackle the plot. He just doesn't do a very good job of it. This time around, the strategy seems to be one of two things. He'll either just describe the events that happen, but he'll do so in a kind of incredulous tone, as if it's obvious why it's bad and he shouldn't even have to explain it.
Andor's friends are hiding out on the farm planet and the Empire there to do an audit and also check visas for illegal aliens. More interesting than watching Andor watch a bunch of idiots turn on each other. Idiots that spend 2 days trying to kill each other to only end up settling their bloodthirsty fight with a game of Star Wars rock, paper, scissors. Yes. Yes, that really happened in what the critics want us to believe is the greatest show the universe has ever produced. And it's as ridiculous as it sounds. Yes, that's where we are. Dirty, mud-living idiots playing rock, paper, scissors.
The rock, paper, scissors thing I'm not even going to address. That's just another example of if it takes you out of it because it's too earthy, I get it, but that's an aesthetic preference, and I actually quite like this scene. He seems to take issue with it because it's really silly despite the show largely trying to be serious and mature, but like, those two things don't contradict at all. Plenty of shows for adults have moments of levity and comedy in them. That's necessary to break up the drama. But my point is, he doesn't actually make arguments for why a lot of the things he describes are bad. To him, it's just enough to say that it happens and do so in a kind of mocking voice to make you feel like if you don't get why it's apparently stupid, you might just be an idiot. His second strategy, however, is far more egregious, and it's one I've seen a lot of other Andor detractors use, so it's worth pointing out. He'll often criticize things that make perfect sense in the story, but will intentionally avoid taking into account certain details that explain away his issues. So a small example of what I mean is this one here. here.
We find out that our lead character is on a super secret mission to steal a TIE fighter prototype, and he steals it from the most barren-looking Empire facility you could imagine. Where is everyone? And don't expect his adventure of getting into the cockpit to be thrilling. Cassian Andor just walks up and hops in, only stopping to blast a droid. He walks from his room, down a corridor, and into the hangar of a top-secret test craft, I might add, and doesn't see one person. No stormtroopers, no security, no one.
Cassian is on a mission to steal a TIE fighter from this facility and, through Luthen, has made contact with an operative working on the inside named Nia. He's disguised as an Imperial test pilot who's just come in and has been given the necessary codes to access the fighter by Nia. He also, of course, chose to do this mission at night when security's going to be pretty lax, as most people on this base are asleep right now. But even still, there are stormtroopers roaming the halls as security detail, as we're literally shown in this scene, and Robot Head conveniently decided not to show that part. If at any point Cassian had bumped into a stormtrooper, they wouldn't have thought too much of him since, again, he's supposed to be a test pilot. And that might well have happened, but we weren't shown it. In fact, there's a bit of dishonest framing here with the way Robot Head chose to word this particular line.
He walks from his room, down a corridor, and into the hangar of a top-secret test craft, I might add, and doesn't see one person.
We don't actually see him walk from his room. We see him enter this corridor right outside the hangar and then go into the hangar. That's literally it. Any of the journey between here and here happened off-screen, and for all we know, he might have run into any of the security personnel walking around the halls. But again, they would have had no reason to assume he was anything other than a new recruit who couldn't sleep, which was his alibi.
You're a new test pilot. You've just arrived, you're excited, you wanted to look around before you went to bed, we started flirting.
I like that.
Most of this first video is just him whinging about the Mon Mothma wedding being boring and dragged out, which is kind of a nothing criticism, and I don't really care for it. Like, he acts like the Take Holma stuff is the only important information we get in this plot line, and that it's all stuff that could have happened over the course of a 5-minute scene.
All of the information needed to be translated to the viewer at the wedding could have literally been delivered in a single 5-minute scene.
Talking about?
I get so tired of people acting like this show is too slow. Because if you're bored by it, I can sympathize with you. Like, that's perfectly valid. It's not for everyone. I'm not even trying to be condescending here. Some people just prefer something a little more fast-moving and punchy, and that's totally fine. But I hate when people advocate for things that would utterly destroy the pacing by rushing payoffs to the finish line just to satiate that boredom. An actual serious problem this season had was the fact that it was rushed because it was meant to be a 5-season story that ended up getting condensed down to 2, which means a lot of season 2 is trying to cram as much stuff as they can into every second of screen time they can find, and the pacing and plot can sometimes suffer as a result because there are various places that are missing vital context or setup. But this isn't something you'll ever see Robot Head point out because the show is just so slow and all he wants is for it to pick up the pace. In his second video, he claims that the reason the Gorman Massacre episode ended up being everyone's favorite is because we finally got an episode with fun, exciting action, when that's not the reason at all.
Well, it's as if they fixed all the problems that plagued the first 6 episodes and turned out what seems to be everyone's favourite episodes. It's funny. Asking for a quicker pace and more action in the series online resulted in being called too stupid to understand it because it's for adults. But once they filled those requests, these 3 episodes became everyone's favourites. It's as if we were right all along.
In actual truth, the Gorman Massacre was so harrowing and impactful because we took all the time that we did to properly set it up across this entire season, and even in a few places last season. It thematically touches on everything the show has been screaming at us about the suppression of truth and the susceptibility the average person has to propaganda, while taking great pains to emphasize just how important it is to never forget your history. It's such a rich, emotional, painful thing to watch, not just because it's happening to and around characters we genuinely love and care about, but because it speaks to real events that are happening right now in our own world, and it's something that any good, compassionate person will find disgusting and heartbreaking. The episode isn't good just because there was cool action, and the fact that Robot Head thinks that's why so many people like it says so much about how he views storytelling as an art form. But anyway, since he spends so much time complaining about the slow pacing of the first arc, most of the points made in the first video aren't really worth talking about. A lot of it is pretty repetitive, and it would basically end up just being me going, "No, you're stupid," every 30 seconds. But there are a few points he makes here that I actually think are worth talking about. Not because they're correct, but because they at least have something substantive attached to to them, and they'd make for an interesting conversation. So I'll just go through them in order.
And here is one of the biggest problems with this show that really needs to be handled better. We know nothing bad is going to happen to Cassian, which means the stakes are very low and there is no real tension. This is made worse by the fact that we don't know any other character in this setup. If Cassian had taken the girl from the opening scenes with him, or even if the other pilot had still been alive, we could have had the tension build up of him trying to keep a companion alive. That could have made the jungle detour slightly interesting.
Honestly, there's a larger discussion to be had about the nature of prequels and whether or not they can have stakes when you know certain characters make it to the original story, and this is something that's been levied at the Star Wars prequel trilogy for years at this point. But it's a stance that I don't buy. First of all, death isn't the only possible outcome of a given scenario. I care about Cassian as a character and don't want bad things to happen to him. So even though I know he's not gonna die, that doesn't mean something else might not befall him. He could be tortured, dismembered, any number of things. This is a world where prosthetic limbs exist that look and function identically to a real one, so for all we know, Cassian was using a robot arm in Rogue One. You don't know if one of these rebels might decide to cut off his hand just to make a point. There is also, of course, the fun of figuring out how our character is going to get out of this scrape, even if we know that he will. In the Narkina 5 arc from the first season, we know Cassian isn't going to spend the 6 years he was sentenced to in that prison, because, well, he'd still have been there by the time of Rogue One, but it's also a desperate and confining situation to find yourself in, and part of the tension that comes from the Breakout episode is worrying about what could possibly go wrong at any given moment, even if part of you rationally understands that Cassian will make it out of there because he has to. And yes, there are other characters in that prison escape that we've grown to care about, and whose fates aren't known to the audience, so there is that added element that Robot Head is advocating for here, but arguably that element is present here. The immediate worry we as the audience have is that the characters waiting for him on Mina Rao are going to be caught by the Empire for being there illegally. If Cassian were to show up any earlier than he eventually did, there wouldn't have been any tension here because he could have just taken them off world for a few days and it would have been fine. These are all characters new to this show. They're not in Rogue One or the original trilogy, which means any or all of them could die or otherwise be arrested by the Imperial auditors if they're found to be illegal immigrants. Or something far worse could happen to them, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. Also, not for nothing, but because Cassian wasn't able to get there in time, Brasso fucking dies, so the stakes are still there, and Robot Head even acknowledges that a few seconds later.
The only purpose of this detour is to delay Andor long enough to cause tension on the farm planet.
So, like, why did you even say that? And on a larger scale, if you're trying to be critical of this show for not having stakes, because apparently characters dying is the only way to generate tension, then, you might want to take a look at the cast, buddy. Cassian, Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and Saw Gerrera are the only ones who we know make it to at least Rogue One. Literally anyone else in the series is on the chopping block, and it's a show where a lot of the main characters do die. Many of these characters surround the ones with plot armor and matter a lot to them, so part of their story stakes are that the people they care about will be safe while they're doing what they can to fight the Empire.
The only interesting thing to come out of this is that Deidre grew up in an Imperial kinderblock.
My parents were criminals. They were arrested when I was 3. I was raised in an Imperial kinderblock.
How old does she mean to be exactly? Now, I know that this show would rather pretend that the Empire's been in control for about 50 years, but it hasn't. At this stage, they've only been in power for about 15 years. Even if her parents were arrested on the first day of the Empire's reign, when she was apparently 3, that would make her only 18, at the oldest. Man, that's some hard 18 years. I mean, they did cast a 45-year-old for the role and gave her a pretty important job, but this revelation means that in the first season, she was only about 17 years old. Like the whole of Disney, Tony Gilroy, the creator of this show, really doesn't give a fuck about Star Wars.
This one's actually interesting because, if I'm being completely honest, I can't say with absolute certainty that this line wasn't a mistake on the part of the writers. They may actually have just not been thinking about it and could have potentially made a continuity goof as a result. I say potentially though because, well, regardless of if it was intentional by the writers, this line doesn't fuck with continuity at all. Yes, the Empire is only about 15 years old at this point, so Dedra is definitely old enough that she would have been at least a late teenager by the time they rose to power, but it's also a thing throughout this show, as well as the original trilogy, that the Empire is constantly trying to suppress galactic history and overwrite it with their own, as have so many historical powers in our own world when they're the ones left to tell the story of their conquest. There's a wonderful little scene in Season 1 where Nemik shows Cassian his analog navigational device, which he'll go on to use during the heist to guide Cassian through the Eye.
That's an old one. Old and true and sturdy. can't be jammed or intercepted. Something breaks, you can fix it yourself.
Nemik talks about how reliant people have become on Imperial technology, to the point where many have forgotten how to use the stuff that came before, and that makes them vulnerable to reliance on the Empire to provide them the things that they need.
There's a growing list of things we've known and forgotten, things they've pushed us to forget. Things like freedom.
Along with the manifesto and all the internal things Cassian took away from his time with Nemik, it's also a recurring thing we see throughout the rest of the show that Cassian continues to use analog technology whenever possible, mainly for practical reasons, like it makes it easier to communicate with Luthen and Clea without the Empire listening in. Similarly, Luthen's entire character is centered around history. He works in the shadows as a rebel, but by day he's the unassuming owner of an antique shop right under Palpatine's nose on Coruscant. He deals with all sorts of historical artifacts, and in one of the first interactions he has with Cassian, he gives him a necklace of something called Sky Kyber, which he tells him is representative of the uprising against the Rakatan invaders.
Don't take less than 50,000 for it. Just know it will always be worth more to me.
If you're someone who knows their lore, you'll recognize the name Rakata as the first real galactic power that came about in the history of this world. They traveled the known galaxy, conquering planets and enslaving whole civilizations, until eventually there were enough revolts from multiple different points which overwhelmed the Rakata and caused them to lose their once powerful grip. This was around the time the Jedi Order was just starting out, and the fall of the Rakata saw the rise of what would eventually be the Republic. Sadly, the show itself doesn't really expand on these details. The most it tells us is that they were an invasive people who sacked prominent worlds like Chandrila and made off with pieces of valuable cultural significance, like the Shandy Merle Luthen secures as a gift for the Mothma wedding. But I still think that's enough to get the point across here. This isn't the first Empire. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. And every time when the chips were down, the people of the galaxy did what they had to do. They put aside their differences and they banded together, and that's how the Republic was born. The Empire knows this history, and they recognize how dangerous it is to let its citizens remember that there was a time before they came along. So while Luthen is working constantly to remind people victory is possible and that it's been done before, they're working around the clock to control galactic perception, the masters of propaganda. No, Dedra, you weren't raised in a Republic Kinderblock, it was an Imperial Kinderblock. Controlling language is a vital aspect of this corruption of truth, and Dedra is the exact kind of zealot who would fall for it hook, line, and sinker. Oh, also, to most people, the Empire is just an extension of the Republic, so there's that. Now, the last topic here worthy of note is a bit of a heavy one, and I put warnings at the beginning of this video, but this is where I must once again remind you that some of the stuff we're about to get into is touchy, to say the least. It's an important conversation to have, one that I'm really glad Andor didn't shy away from exploring, but one that naturally has been met with a lot of backlash, because a lot of Star Wars fans are fundamentally children who never grew out of that stage of their lives. Yes, it's time to talk about the sexual assault scene. But before we discuss what Robot Head and others had to say about it, I think it's worth going over what this scene actually is, what it accomplishes, and why it was absolutely necessary. Now, for those of you who think this is the first time something like sexual assault has been in a piece of Star Wars media, I'd like to direct your attention all the way back to 1983, when Princess Leia was taken as a slave by Jabba the Hutt and forced to wear a bikini. The movie doesn't tell us explicitly if Jabba did anything other than that to Leia, but I'm afraid forcing your slave to wear a skimpy outfit and sit in front of you after you've licked her repeatedly constitutes a sexual assault. And just because the film doesn't call it out as such doesn't mean it isn't happening. And it's not just Leia, there are other scantily clad slave women paraded in front of Jabba for his amusement, one of whom resists his advances when he yanks her chain with clear intent to force himself on her, and is then punished via death by rancor for not consenting. To be clear, there are shades of gray to whether I considered it an issue that the movie doesn't address this directly. Unlike Andor, Return of the Jedi actually is targeted toward children primarily, and calling attention to such a heavy topic like that would only clash with the relatively jovial tone of the story, the sort of pulpy action-adventure energy we're trying to have with this opening rescue mission. That said, if you don't want something like that to bog down the tone of your movie, you could always just not include it. It doesn't actually add that much to the story. It just exists as eye candy for sex-crazed teenage boys who found her character hot in the previous films. I know the robot heads in my audience who watched these movies as little boys and never quite grew out of that developmental stage are gonna get heated at me for even saying that and call me woke or whatever, but that's my stance on it. And frankly, the fact that there are so many Star Wars fans out there like that who would advocate for leaving that in the film just so they can get their rocks off to a sex slave in a golden bikini is the reason that this show received received the response that it did after the Bix scene. It speaks to a level of immaturity that persists within this fandom, and we're gonna get to all that in just a second, but the point here is that Andor is not the first piece of on-screen Star Wars media to depict sexual assault. It's just the first to actually address it meaningfully, and it does a really good job of it. What I especially appreciate about this is the fact that the show doesn't shy away from the word rape.
He tried to rape me.
He tried to rape her, that's what happened, and putting it any other way or trying to sugarcoat it would only serve to diminish the effect. In a system like this one, where fascistic man-babies control society and are placed in ill-deserved positions of power, no matter how small and meaningless that position actually is, people like this will squeeze it for everything it's worth. They take what they want and they leave nothing behind, and they do so because fundamentally, they're conditioned to believe that they deserve it, that they're better than you. The system is right because it puts you beneath me. The fact of the matter is that things like this are happening constantly throughout the galaxy on just as many backwater farm planets, and just like how it's vital in a story like this to depict the countless other Imperial atrocities, from slavery to genocide to torture or unlawful imprisonment, it's also important to depict something like rape, even if it's uncomfortable to watch, which it absolutely should be, don't get me wrong. Anyone who watched this scene without feeling disgust or some form of moral outrage is someone I don't trust, but the issue that's happened here is that some Star Wars fans, particularly ones already primed to look for any reason they can to hate Andor, are confusing the upset feelings this scene elicits with outrage at the show itself, almost like the show is condoning it in some way. If you think I'm joking or exaggerating, I can assure you guys that when this episode first came out, anyone like me who defended the necessity of the rape scene online was met with a slurry of accusations about how we're just sick perverts who want to see a woman forcibly taken advantage of, like Tony Gilroy is some sick and twisted monster and we're all just as bad for finding entertainment in it. The problem, of course, being that there's a difference between finding something entertaining and considering it well made from an artistic standpoint. I'm always preaching on this channel that liking something and thinking it's good aren't the same thing, and situations like this are exactly why it's so important to make that distinction. I don't enjoy films like Schindler's List because it does a very good job depicting the Holocaust and just how harrowing that entire experience was for so many people, but it's still an excellent film, and I'd argue necessary as a piece of art. This scene in Andor is not something I have fun watching. It's a genuinely horrific thing to see happen to anyone, let alone a character I love who's already been through so much, and anytime I rewatch this episode, I'll be doing so with a pit in my stomach knowing what's coming. But I don't shy away from it or the feelings of dread it fills me with, because that's how I should be feeling watching this scene. People often look at movies and shows as nothing more than an avenue for escapism, but art is meant to make you uncomfortable, to challenge the way you view the world and force you to sit with certain parts of our reality that sometimes we just don't want to think about. Things that some of us don't simply have the privilege to ignore. Oh, but it shouldn't have been in Star Wars because Star Wars is for kids. Look, I already went over how this is not a kid's show. Just because it's a Star Wars show and it's on Disney Plus does not mean anything. Parental controls exist for a reason, and I don't know, maybe parents should just be more vigilant to the kind of shit their kids are watching instead of plopping them in front of a TV and giving them unrestricted access to whatever their hearts desire. I definitely think this episode should have come with a content warning at the beginning for anyone who might have trauma about this sort of thing, just so they know what they're getting into, and that's a whole separate discussion. But again, if you didn't know Andor was meant for adults after the first scene took place in a brothel, I don't know what to tell you. Like I said, that's why they chose that setting for the opening. As a related point, there's this weird mindset Robot Head has, and I've seen it from a lot of other Andor detractors as well, that the show actually isn't for adults, and that as adult content goes, it's actually pretty tame. I'm not sure if it makes much sense for a show to simultaneously be too much for kids and also not adult enough to be considered mature, but I guess to these people, Andor hits that happy middle ground where it doesn't belong in either demographic and is therefore not allowed to do or say anything. Perfect. Everybody wins. Some people think Andor fans call the show adult because there's things like sex and cussing, and oh my god, they even made Basil Oregano say a swear word. But no, these people have it backwards. The show isn't adult because those elements are in it. These elements are in it because the show is for adults. Now that being said, there's at least some merit behind the idea that this show is relatively chill when compared to other adult content, specifically that which you might find in an HBO show like Game of Thrones or Succession. My take on the rape scene is that while it's still really gross and hard to watch, it was done very tastefully in that they didn't feel the need to take it any further than him throwing her against a wall and Bix being forced to fight him off and eventually kill him. It's still a really messed up situation, but obviously the show could have shown less restraint and really gone all out, which I just think would have been gratuitous and unnecessary. It seems like the showrunners felt the same way, so all clothes remained on the entire time, and I think that was the right call. Turns out Tony knows what he's doing or something. And you know what? Robothead agrees with me that the scene didn't go as far as it could have, but the way he talks about it is... I'm just gonna let it play.
All hell breaks loose on the farm planet when one of the Imperial officers tries to take advantage of Andor's special friend. No, sorry, not him, her. And when I say all hell broke out, I'm referring to the online outrage more than the show. Because if you were just going by the online reaction, you would have thought Marcellus Wallace had to take on Zed and the Gimp in one of the farm sheds. Now, in what will piss everyone off, I can see both sides of the argument. And people hate that. Personally, I don't care about the scene itself. I think most people who are critical of this just see it as a further moving away from the original George Lucas vision. Like not having people wearing glasses in Star Wars, which is a change I don't like, or leather jacket wearing Vespa gangs. That is a far bigger departure from what Star Wars should be than a assault scene. And it made me feel way more violated. But in reality, for me, George burning Anakin alive is a lot worse than throwing someone against a wall.
I find this reductive description of the scene extremely fucking disgusting, and it misses the point entirely. He's trying to do this thing where he acts like this whole discourse is beneath him and he doesn't care about it, but what he's done as a result is showcase that he is fundamentally incapable or unwilling to actually engage with what's happening in the content he's reviewing, because he's already made up his mind going in. And of course, he advocates for the show sugarcoating it by not explicitly using the word rape, because my god, think of the kiddies, but honestly, it all just comes across as so dishonest. The fact of the matter is, nothing about any of his videos reads to me as anything other than a man who never would have allowed himself to give this show a positive review. And that's accentuated even further in his second video, where the entire time he's talking about how Season 2 finally got good thanks to the action, but spends the entire video dishing out backhanded compliments and missing the point once again. There's nothing fair about the way he's chosen to approach this show, and there was never going to be, because fundamentally he understands, at least on some level, that just wouldn't have flown with his audience. Way earlier in this video, I mentioned how he always feels the need to randomly inject jabs at TLJ in every one of his videos in order to signal to the people who watch him that that movie is really bad, and he hasn't forgotten about it. Robothead recognizes what these people want to hear, and it certainly isn't fair and reasoned media analysis. No, they want him to reinforce that TLJ is bad, and that nothing Disney puts out will ever be good, because they're a woke company who ruined Star Wars with a feminist agenda and personally beat George Lucas with a baseball bat back in 2012. Robothead and others like him know that's the audience they've cultivated, and they know what'll happen if they break the mold and start telling them opinions they don't want to hear. Know how I know that? Because it's literally happened to me. A good bulk of my videos are pretty critical of Disney Star Wars, obviously, and some of my most popular videos are the ones where I tear apart the Obi-Wan Kenobi show in excruciating detail. I have no misconceptions about how a lot of people found my channel, and with that is gonna come with a lot of expectations that I keep doing videos talking about how all the new stuff is shit, which is more or less fine by me, since most of it actually is. I just try to approach everything I review honestly and fairly, which is why I could never in good conscience say Andor is bad. I know it isn't, and it would taste a lie to say otherwise just because there's a lot of people who'd give me views to hear it. But I've also directed a lot of my attention to past Star Wars things because, frankly, I'm interested in discussing all of Star Wars, not just the dogmatic narrow view of Disney. So I've done videos on the Clone Wars and the prequel trilogy, and I've tried my best to apply the exact same standard to them that I do with any of the Disney stuff, which unfortunately leads me to the conclusion that a lot of that stuff isn't very good either. It turns out bad writing has existed in this franchise for a lot longer than Disney's owned it, and some people just don't want to hear that. I've gotten plenty of comments to the effect of, man, I followed you for your Disney bashing, but now that you've directed it toward thing I like, I just can't support you anymore. You went after wrong thing. A lot of people have an inherent bias against Disney stuff and aren't willing to humor the idea that Star Wars could have ever been bad before it, and I think that's a bit hypocritical. Now, to be clear, I'm not trying to be all woe is me about any of this. My channel is doing just fine, and I'm not really worried about some people being mad at me for applying my standards consistently, but the point I'm trying to make here is that a lot of these people have built their entire reputations on shitting on Disney, Star Wars, and other pieces of modern pop culture, specifically under the lens of how it's all woke garbage. I was thankfully able to kind of set myself apart from the sort of crowd that attracts for the most part by being pretty open about my politics and my standards while my channel was still relatively small, but these guys have way larger followings than me, anywhere in the hundreds of thousands, some of them even over 1 million. in, and a large percentage of that crowd are the types of people who wouldn't be very happy with them if they praised the woke new Disney show, and they know that. I said a bit ago that something I noticed really quickly when watching his Andor reviews alongside videos criticizing other Disney Star Wars shows is that he doesn't really talk about the story too much if he can help it. If it's an episode of The Acolyte, he has no problem going into specifics about how character actions don't make sense or how certain bits of plot development are idiotic, but when it comes to Andor, the most he can really do is vaguely go over the events, call them boring, point out slight nitpicks here and there that are wrong more often than not, and whine incessantly about culture war stuff because he thinks the Mothma wedding is too girly. And this is because he knows full well that the show is good. If there were major story issues to point out, then he absolutely would, but he can't, and that kind of freaks him out a little bit. A Disney Star Wars show being well written is admittedly uncharted territory for all of us, and I don't know what I would do if I'd built my channel off of one particular niche and refused to be honest when along came an exception to my general rule. Now, I definitely don't think all the people who shit on Andor are doing it for financial purposes. A lot of them don't even have particularly large channels. Some don't even have one at all, as far as I'm aware. But I think there's a very similar drive underneath the exteriors of a lot of these dissenters that's kind of related to the larger disease here. Robot Head and those like him are so successful in pandering to their audience because there are a lot of people who fundamentally cannot wrap their brains around the idea of Disney Star Wars producing anything other than crap. And yes, a lot of that is motivated by political biases, but there are many who simply can't get behind that concept wholesale, no matter what releases or how good it is. To them, it'll always be fake Star Wars. It'll always have this impossible barrier placed in front of it, as unfair as that is. Most of the ones I've personally encountered when having these discussions are either EU purists or Lucas purists, who overlap a lot, but definitely are different things. But the sentiment remains the same either way. If it was made before Disney took the helm, it's automatically better no matter what, and it automatically classifies as the real Star Wars no matter how bad it is. I think that's a pretty absurd standard to have, of course, but all I can really feel is pity for anyone who looks at the prequel trilogy and unironically argues that it's better than one of the most thematically rich and emotionally powerful things Star Wars has ever released. Most of these people will never grow out of their biases, and it's restricting their ability to appreciate genuinely great art, which breaks my heart. This video was originally going to be me going through a lot of different takes on the show, not just Robot Heads, but honestly, as fun as it is to make fun of Star Wars theory for his bricks and screws argument, God knows I have, that just felt too easy. He had a lot to say about the sexual assault scene as well, and honestly, it would take an entire video all on its own to break down everything wrong with this one single tweet, but it just feels like low-hanging fruit. Everyone knows he's a clown, and plenty of others have already sufficiently explained all the many reasons why Vader wouldn't stand for that shit is one of the stupidest things you'll ever hear. The only people who still take Star Wars theory seriously at this point are the ones who dick ride him no matter what, and those aren't people I was ever going to convince with this video anyway. And with someone like Theory, I definitely think there is a financial incentive behind hating on Andor. He's certainly been milking the backlash he's received since giving his initial thoughts on season 2 for all it's worth. But there's an old saying that I think applies really well here. Never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained with stupidity. I think Gandhi said that or something. Theory isn't someone with a specific agenda to put down every Disney Star Wars thing. He was actually pretty positive towards shows like Ahsoka until the last couple of episodes, mainly episode 5 for reasons that I imagine are obvious. No, his agenda is much more simple. I want to see cool lightsaber shit, and I want to see Hayden Christensen back as Anakin, because Anakin is cool and awesome and badass, and the way George chose to write his character is secretly misunderstood genius.
It was extremely romantic.
So with people like him, I think the answer is much more simple. He simply found the show boring and couldn't adequately explain what it was he didn't like about it beyond that, so he started saying really bizarre shit like the bricks and screws thing. His fans come to him for his opinions on these new shows, and when all he can give them is that he simply doesn't care for it, they're naturally going to ask for elaboration that he's just not fit to give. He isn't really smart enough to talk about shows that aren't meant for babies, and he gets really defensive when people make fun of him for whining about the supposed pretension of Andor fans. I know a lot of people are going to call me pretentious for even saying all of that, and there's really nothing I can do to stop it, but I just want to make this one thing clear. I am not saying he isn't smart enough to understand the show. I simply don't think Theory and others like him have the attention spans to pay it the attention necessary to pick up on the deeper themes and subtext, and those aren't the same thing. It's no big deal if you found the show boring and don't want to continue watching it, but don't go making ridiculous arguments about why it's not good and then get all defensive when people call you dumb for it. Bottom line, maybe there's a level of truth to that with Robot Head and his ilk. Maybe he isn't being dishonest on purpose. Maybe he's just stupid. There's certainly a compelling compelling case to be made there, but I don't know, there's something behind the smugness in his voice that tells me he knows exactly what he's doing and he just doesn't care. But either way, the videos are bad and Andor is really, really good. Once again, I apologize if you were hoping for a more proper review of this season, but that will come eventually if you just give me time and let me shift focus on other projects I need to get started on first. For now, I'll say only this. Andor Season 2 isn't quite as good as the first, mainly due to the condensed pacing, like I mentioned earlier, that facilitated a few contrivances and half-baked payoffs, but on the whole, it's great, and I give it an 8.5 out of 10. Thanks for watching. If you like this video and you want to see more in this style, I'm happy to oblige, because they're actually pretty fun to make, so just leave a comment down below. Either way, I'm glad I was able to finally vent my frustrations about that god-awful Season 1 video after nearly 3 years. If you want to support me financially, you can find the link to my Patreon down below, or you can become a channel member, which allows you access to every one of my new videos 2 days ahead of everyone else. Also linked below is my Discord server, all the necessary socials, and of course, a link to my OnlyFans. Otherwise, that's all I've got for you this time. Ta-ta for now.